Let's talk about something most people don't want to admitting. They only value something once it's gone. And nowhere is that more true than with avoidant people in relationships. You show up fully, you give your love without holding back. You listen, you understand, you forgive, you care at a level most people can't even imagine. You're not just empathic, you're a super empath. You feel everything deeply. You don't love casually, you invest. You fight for someone even when they're not fighting for you. You hang on even when it hurts. Not because you're weak, but because your love is strong. But here's the cruel irony. The avoidant doesn't feel the weight of that love when it's there. To them, your consistency becomes background noise. Your forgiveness becomes expected. Your understanding becomes something they rely on, but never appreciate. They get comfortable, too comfortable. So what do? They pull away. They resist closeness. They create distance not because you're too much, but because they're afraid of how deeply they could feel if they let themselves. They take and take until one day something shifts. That beautiful, rare soul, you start to pull away, not with drama, not with anger, but with quiet dignity. You detach. And in that moment, the silence becomes deafening. The peace you brought to their chaos is suddenly gone. The way you remembered the little things, the way you noticed what they needed before they even asked, the patience, the effort, the loyalty, all of it gone. And now they feel it. Now they realize the person they kept at arm's length was the very person who've gone to war for their soul. But here's the hard truth. It's too late. Because when a super empath detaches, it's not a game. It's not a tactic. It's a shift in energy. You didn't just stop texting. You stopped hoping. You stopped waiting. You stopped believing in their potential and started honoring your worth. And no apology, no. I miss you. No sudden awakening will ever be enough, because when you finally walked away, it wasn't to teach them a lesson. It was because you had learned yours. And if they reach out months later saying, I didn't realize what I had until it was gone, you'll know they're telling the truth. They didn't, because they couldn't. Avoidants don't recognize value in closeness until it's no longer available to them. But you're not angry. You're not bitter. You've simply evolved past the space where breadcrumbs were enough, because when you finally stopped trying to be enough for someone who's emotionally unavailable, you realize you were never the problem. You were the gift they didn't know how to hold. And they'll remember you, not for the pain you caused, but for the peace you brought. They'll remember your warmth in a world that left them cold. But most of all, they'll remember that once a super empath detaches, they never come back. Avoidants don't appreciate consistent love until it's absent. It's one of the most painful truths for someone with a big heart to learn. When you show up with stability, with calmness, with a genuine desire to care for someone else, it can be mistaken as something that will always be there. It becomes familiar, and unfortunately, people who are avoidant often interpret familiarity as something to escape rather than something to cherish. You give and give. You support them in moments they don't even realize they need support. You remain steady even when they're emotionally distant. You're there when they push you away. You don't walk away when they go cold, when they shut down, when they stop communicating. Instead, you try harder. You try to love them louder, because that's what your heart tells you to do. But the avoidant doesn't recognize that as love. They see it as pressure. They feel smothered by the very thing that's trying to hold them together. And instead of being grateful, they pull back. They ghost, they go silent, or they give half effort, making you question your worth. And in that constant cycle of giving and being met with distance, you begin to feel unseen. The truth is, people who are avoidant are often not malicious. They're not out to hurt you. They're simply afraid of what it means to be truly close to someone. Deep down, they don't trust intimacy. They've learned that love can hurt, that being vulnerable can lead to pain, so they protect themselves by creating distance. But what happens in that process is they push away the very person who would have held them with the most care. And you, being the super empath, you absorb that. You carry the weight of the entire relationship on your shoulders, thinking maybe if you just love them enough, they'll finally feel safe. You mistake their coldness for a wound you're supposed to heal. You make excuses for their behavior. You explain away their silence. You tell yourself, maybe they just need time. And while you're busy giving them room to breathe, you're also holding your breath, waiting for them to notice you again. But they don't. Not when you're still around. Not when your love is constant, accessible, and unshaken. They see your loyalty as something they don't need to earn. They confuse your patience with permission. And because you're so emotionally available, they assume you'll never leave. That's the mistake they make. They underestimate the quiet strength of a person who has stayed soft in a world that's tried to harden them. They think your compassion is infinite. They think your heart is theirs to borrow forever. But every moment they neglect you, every time they dismiss your needs, every time they choose their fear over connection, they chip away at the bond you've worked so hard to protect. Then, one day, something inside you shifts. You stop trying. You stop begging for connection. You stop explaining yourself. You stop overfunctioning to make up for what they won't do. You stop because your spirit gets tired. Your energy becomes sacred. You begin to realize that you deserve more than almost love. And when you stop showing up in the way you used to, when your energy no longer fills the space between their silence, that's when they notice. That's when the absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. That's when the weight of what they've lost starts to settle in. Because now they feel the emptiness you used to shield them from. Now they remember the small things you did, the thoughtful check-ins, the emotional availability, the way you understood them without them needing to explain. Now they feel the void, and for the first time, they begin to grasp just how deeply you loved them. But here's the tragedy. They only realize it when it's too late. They only feel the magnitude of your love when it's no longer accessible. Because for avoidance, love feels safest from a distance. Only when you're no longer there to provide comfort do they begin to feel the discomfort of your absence. Only when your energy has fully pulled away do they start to understand that your presence was never guaranteed. They thought you'd always be there. They thought you'd always wait. They thought your love could outlast their avoidance. But even the most powerful empath reaches a point where love turns into self-preservation. You don't detach because you stopped caring. You detach because you finally realize that your love deserves to be seen, not just when it's gone, but while it's still being given. Super empaths love deeply, forgive easily, and give selflessly. They don't just feel emotions, they absorb them. They feel pain even when it's not theirs. They carry emotional burdens for people they care about, often without being asked. Their love is nurturing, healing, unconditional. When they choose to love someone, they don't just give their time or attention. They give their soul. They pay attention to details others miss. They remember the things you said in passing weeks ago. They notice your moods before you speak a word. They hold space for your struggles without needing anything in return. That kind of emotional investment is rare, and that kind of love, it's not loud. It doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't demand recognition. It just shows up day after day, quietly doing the emotional work that most people run away from. When a super empath enters someone's life, they become a sanctuary. They bring calm to chaos. They offer understanding when everyone else offers judgment. They don't walk away when things get hard. In fact, that's when they lean in the most. When the other person is distant, the super empath reaches out. When someone lashes out in pain, the empath tries to understand what's underneath it. They don't personalize the hurt. They try to heal it. But in doing so, they often lose themselves. They give even when they're running on empty. They forgive not because they're nor but because they know what it feels like to be broken. They hold compassion for others while ignoring the pain in their own chest. They push aside their needs to meet the needs of someone who may not even see the sacrifice being made. That's the dangerous part. Super empaths don't just give love. They give second chances, third chances, and even more. They see potential where others see patterns. They believe people can change, even when the signs say otherwise. They don't walk away easily because they know what abandonment feels like, and they never want to be the cause of it. So they stay longer than they should. They justify behaviors that hurt, they rationalize red flags, they water a connection hoping it will bloom, even when the soil is dry and cracked. But there's always a breaking point. Even the most giving heart has limits, and when that limit is reached, something inside them changes. Slowly, without warning, their energy shifts. It's not dramatic. It's not destructive. It's subtle, but powerful. They stop over-explaining. They stop chasing. They stop putting themselves last. It's not out of anger. It's not revenge. It's a quiet reclaiming of power. After giving so much of themselves for so long, they realize the person they were loving was never meeting them halfway. They begin to see how many times they were ignored, dismissed, or taken for granted. And once that clarity sets in, the super empath begins to detach. Not from love, but from self-neglect. They no longer feel responsible for someone else's emotional growth. They no longer believe that loving harder will fix what's broken. They finally see that their love can't compensate for someone else's lack of effort, and the person on the receiving end of that love. They often don't notice the shift until it's too late. They had become so accustomed to the super empath's giving nature that they assumed it would always be there. They thought love was a faucet they could turn on whenever they wanted. But now the water has stopped flowing. The warmth is gone. The emotional support, the consistent care, The quiet understanding, it's all disappeared. And only then do they realize the magnitude of what they had. They remember how it felt to be seen without speaking. They remember the way the super empath made them feel safe, understood, valued. But memories can't bring back what was lost. Reflection doesn't rebuild what's been broken through neglect, because the love of a super empath is not transactional, it's not conditional, but it is sacred. And once it's been drained, it doesn't refill easily. They don't just walk away. They walk through the pain of letting go, knowing they gave everything they had. And even when their heart still loves, their soul knows it's time to stop giving to someone who never truly received it. Avoidants mistake emotional safety for emotional suffocation. It's not because the love isn't real or the connection isn't deep, but because their internal wiring is often built around fear. Fear of closeness, fear of vulnerability, fear of being truly seen. So when someone comes into their life offering consistent emotional presence, genuine care, and unwavering support, it triggers something in them. It makes them feel exposed. And instead of recognizing the beauty in that kind of connection, they interpret it as a threat. A super empath brings emotional clarity, stability, and honesty, all the things the avoidant part of someone isn't comfortable handling. So rather than embracing that emotional safety, the avoidant person starts to feel suffocated. They begin to perceive love not as a gift but as a burden. Every gesture of care, every vulnerable conversation, every attempt to get closer is filtered through a lens of emotional discomfort. The very things that would make most people feel cherished make the avoidant feel cornered. They don't know how to sit with emotional intimacy because it feels unfamiliar, it feels intense, it feels like losing control. So they start to withdraw, they pull back their energy, they give less and less of themselves, not necessarily because they want to hurt the other person, but because they think distance equals safety. And in that process, they hurt the person who's trying the hardest to love them. The avoidant doesn't realize that their need to protect themselves is slowly damaging the connection. They don't see how their silence speaks louder than their words. They don't notice how their hesitation to be emotionally present begins to feel like rejection. And the super empath, being deeply intuitive and emotionally aware, feels every bit of it. They sense the shift. They feel the wall go up. They notice the lack of engagement, the short replies, the lack of interest in real conversations. But instead of walking away immediately, they lean in, they try to fix it, they try to reassure the avoidant that their love is safe. They say things like, "I'm not here to hurt you," or "You can trust me," because that's what empaths do. They soothe, they repair, they try to connect. But no amount of reassurance can fix someone who is afraid of being loved. To the avoidant, emotional safety feels like pressure. The more you care, the more overwhelmed they become. The more you open up, the more they close off. Because somewhere deep inside, they believe that if they allow themselves to be truly loved, they'll eventually be abandoned, betrayed, or hurt. So they preemptively create distance to protect themselves from a pain that hasn't even happened. And in doing so, they create the very pain they were trying to avoid. They end up pushing away someone who had no intention of leaving. Someone who would have stayed through the hard days, the complicated emotions, the healing process. Super empaths don't love casually. Their presence is a sanctuary. Their love is a safe haven, but that safety can feel like danger to someone who's never known consistent love. And so the avoidant confuses the calm for control, the consistency for pressure, the emotional availability for demand. They misinterpret genuine concern as a loss of freedom. They think the relationship is closing in on them, when in reality, it's offering them the very thing they've always longed for. But longing and accepting are two different things. The avoidant longs for love, but they don't know how to hold it. They crave connection, but they run from the closeness that comes with it. It's a tragic cycle. The more the empath offers stability, the more the avoidant retreats. The more love is given, the more it feels like an obligation. And eventually, the empath starts to feel like they're asking for too much just by asking for emotional presence. They begin to silence their needs, water themselves down, walk on eggshells, all to keep the connection alive. But emotional safety should never feel like a trap. It should never be punished with withdrawal. The moment someone sees healthy love as suffocation is the moment they begin to destroy the very thing they once said they wanted. Because emotional availability doesn't take away your freedom. It gives you the freedom to be seen, known, and loved for who you really are. When a super empath detaches, it's calm, final, and life-changing. It doesn't come with loud announcements, threats, or ultimatums. It doesn't look like what people expect when someone gives up. It's not messy, it's not impulsive, it's quiet, it's subtle, and it's powerful, because by the time a super empath reaches the point of detachment, they've already gone through every stage of heartbreak while still in the relationship. They've cried in silence. They've begged without words. They've waited longer than they should have. They've hoped, doubted, explained, justified, and sacrificed. They've reached out, they've leaned in, and they've held on tightly, even when it hurt. They've poured love into someone who didn't know how to receive it. And they did it over and over again, thinking maybe one more act of kindness would finally unlock the connection they craved. But eventually, something shifts inside them. It's not dramatic. It's not reactive. It's not even angry. It's just a deep internal realization that nothing they do will ever be enough for someone who doesn't want to meet them halfway. They stop explaining themselves. They stop initiating conversations. They stop trying to fix things that only one person is invested in fixing. And it's not because they no longer care. It's because they've realized that their care was never truly valued. Their loyalty was taken for granted. Their emotional labor went noticed. Their vulnerability was met with distance. Their love was met with resistance. And after trying so hard to keep the connection alive, they finally feel it. The weight of exhaustion, the quiet clarity, the recognition that it's time to let go. Detachment for a super empath is not about punishing the other person. It's not about teaching them a lesson or making them regret anything. It's not even about protecting their pride. It's about protecting their peace. After giving so much of their heart, their energy, and their soul, they finally understand that staying in us that constantly invalidates their presence is no longer an act of love. It's an act of self-abandonment. So they choose themselves, not in a selfish way, but in a sacred one. They reclaim the energy that was once freely given. They stop showing up in places where they're only tolerated, not appreciated. And the beauty of this kind of detachment is that it's not filled with bitterness or resentment. It's filled with grace. It's filled with quiet strength. It's filled with a kind of dignity that can only come from someone who loved deeply and still chose to walk away when love wasn't being returned. The person on the receiving end of this detachment often doesn't see it coming. They're so used to the empath being available, being understanding, being patient, that they mistake all that emotional generosity as a permanent fixture. They assume the empath will always be there, no matter how little they give in return. So when that consistent presence suddenly disappears, it leaves a void, silence they're not used to, a peace they never appreciated until it was gone. And it's in that absence that they start to feel the true impact of the empath's love. They remember the soft reminders to take care of themselves. They remember the late night support, the emotional check-ins, the patience during their worst moments, the love that was never loud, but always present. But by then, the super empath is already gone. Not always physically, but emotionally, their heart has closed that chapter. They may still speak politely, still wish the other person well, but their emotional attachment is no longer tethered to someone who couldn't value it. And what's most powerful about this kind of detachment is that it's not temporary. It doesn't waver when the avoidant suddenly starts reaching out. It doesn't crumble when apologies arrive. It doesn't shift when promises are made, because this detachment came from truth. A truth that was discovered through pain, through reflection, through growth. A truth that says, I deserve more. I gave more. And now, I choose me. What once looked like unconditional love now looks like unwavering boundaries. What once felt like self-sacrifice now feels like self-respect. And what once was a desperate attempt to be enough now becomes a peaceful decision to no longer beg for the bare minimum. The avoidant may come back. They may realize what they've lost. But the super empath won't return to what broke them. Because detachment is not the absence of love. It's the presence of clarity, and it becomes the turning point that separates who they were from who they're becoming. The avoidance regret always arrives after your emotional exit. Not when you're still checking in. Not when you're still trying to make things work. Not when you're pouring love into a space that feels increasingly empty. Their regret doesn't come when you're holding on. It comes after you've finally let go, not just with your hands, but with your heart, as long as you're emotionally present. Even if you're hurting, even if you're exhausted, they still feel like they have access to you. They still believe, somewhere deep inside, that you'll come back, that you'll stay, that your love is unconditional to the point of self-abandonment. They think you're still there, emotionally tethered, just waiting for them to catch up. So they don't feel the urgency. They don't feel the consequence of their absence, because they assume your loyalty will hold even if theirs disappears. Avoidants often live in a cycle of emotional disconnection. They keep people close enough to not be alone, but far enough to avoid vulnerability. When someone like you comes into their life, someone who gives without keeping score, someone who stays steady when emotions run high, someone who truly sees them, they may not know how to handle it. They like the comfort, they like the presence, but they fear the closeness. And instead of leaning into that fear and working through it, they retreat. They shut down. They self-sabotage. And in that process, they don't realize what's slipping through their fingers. They think they have time. They think the love will wait. They think the empath will always be there. But the emotional exit of a super empath isn't loud or messy. It's subtle, slow, and deeply internal. Long before you stop responding to their messages, you stop responding with your heart. You stop hoping. You stop waiting for them to change. You stop looking for signs that they finally understand your worth. Something inside you goes quiet, not because you've stopped caring, but because you've stopped believing that your care will ever be enough to make them stay. And that's when the shift begins. You start reclaiming your energy. You start pouring into yourself what you used to pour into them. You start realizing that love shouldn't feel like chasing someone who's always running. And once you've emotionally left, there's no more convincing, no more pleading, no more longing. You see things as they are, not as you wished they would be. You accept the truth, even when it hurts. And that kind of emotional departure, that inner shift, is the one thing an avoidant isn't prepared for. Because they're used to people begging for closeness. They're used to others trying to break through their walls. They're used to being pursued even in their silence. But when you stop chasing, when you stop knocking on the door, they're left alone with their own thoughts. And that silence, that's where the regret begins. It doesn't come all at once. It builds, slowly, quietly. It creeps in during moments they don't expect. When they reach for their phone and your name isn't there. When they have good news and realize they have no one to share it with. When they remember how you made them feel safe, how you listened without judgment, how you stayed when others would have walked away. That's when the memory of your love starts to sting. That's when the weight of what they lost starts to feel real. Not just because you're gone, but because you're not coming back. Because this time they can feel it. The difference. The detachment, the finality. They may try to reach out. They may test the waters. A simple message, a like on social media, a random memory shared as if nothing happened. But it won't be met with the same warmth, the same openness, the same heart. Because when a super empath emotionally exits, they don't do it halfway. They've already mourned the connection. They've already cried the tears. They've already written the final chapter in their mind, even if the story didn't get a proper ending. And that's what makes the regret so heavy for the avoidant. The realization that they had someone rare, someone real, someone irreplaceable, and they didn't see it until it was already gone. Detachment isn't punishment. It's self-respect fully activated. When a super empath detaches, it's not to hurt the other person or make them feel the pain they caused. It's not about revenge or getting even. It's about reaching a point where continuing to give, care, and love starts to feel like self-betrayal. Super empaths give their heart with the purest intentions. They hold space for others even when they aren't given space in return. They show up with consistency, with depth, with emotional availability. They want to understand, to heal, to connect. But over time, when they're constantly met with emotional unavailability, silence or hot and cold behavior, something inside them begins to change. Not an explosion. It's not a breakdown. It's a quiet realization that their energy is being drained, not cherished. At first they blame themselves. They wonder if they're asking for too much. They question whether they're being too sensitive, too emotional, too intense. They start to doubt their worth, shrinking themselves in hopes of fitting into the mold of what the other person can handle. But you can only shrink for so long before you start to disappear. Super empaths are strong, but they're also human. They need love that's returned. They need effort that matches theirs. They need communication that doesn't make them feel like they're always reaching. When those needs go unmet, they don't explode outward. They implode inward. And in that internal collapse, they find clarity. The moment they recognize that their love isn't being honored, that their presence is being taken for granted, they begin to pull back. Slowly, quietly, without making it a show. They stop initiating. They stop over-explaining. They stop trying to be enough for someone who only shows up when it's convenient. This isn't done to make a point. It's not done to spark guilt or manipulate emotions. It's done because their soul is tired. Tired of carrying the emotional weight of two people. Tired of being the only one reaching across the gap. Tired of pretending that crumbs are enough when they once served feasts. And when that detachment sets in, it's different from distance or silence. It's not temporary. It's not a test. It's a decision. A decision to honor their worth. A decision to protect their peace. A decision to stop handing their heart to someone who only holds it carelessly. That decision isn't made lightly. It comes after sleepless nights, silent tears, and endless overthinking. It comes after giving the benefit of the doubt more times than they can count. It comes after forgiving what hurt them and understanding what confused them. But when the decision is made, it's final, not because they don't love anymore, because they finally love themselves enough to stop settling. To the outside world, the super empath may still look the same. They may still be kind. They may still respond with grace. But inside, their heart has closed the chapter. Not with bitterness, but with resolve. They're no longer available for one-sided love. They're no longer accessible to people who only show up when they need something. They've stopped hoping the other person will change. They've stopped holding on to potential. They've accepted reality for what it is, not what they wished it would be. And that acceptance sets them free. The avoidant, the inconsistent, the emotionally unavailable, they often don't understand what happened. They don't realize the impact of their actions until the energy is no longer there. They reach out, expecting the same warmth, the same understanding, the same open door, but it's closed now, not because of hate, but because of healing, because a super empath doesn't shut people out of spite. They close doors to preserve the light inside them. They choose solitude over situations that make them feel small. They choose clarity over confusion. They choose self-respect over constant emotional repair. In the end, detachment doesn't mean they didn't care. It means they cared too much for too long without being met where they stood. It means they gave chances long after others would have walked away. It means they stayed in love until staying started to cost them their peace. And once they choose peace, they never go back to what disturbed it. Because for a super empath, detachment is not the absence of love. It's the presence of self-worth rising up after being silent for far too long.